The list wasn't supposed to mean anything. It was just one of those filler articles. 33 prison escapees still missing. The kind of clickbait that clogs up feeds between politics and celebrity divorces. But when my eyes skimmed the names, one stopped me cold. Maris Vale. Her entry was short, almost dismissive. Sentenced for second-degree murder, escaped in 1970, still at large. If alive, she'd be 91. Temporarily absent, the database called her. Temporarily for half a century. It should have been a curiosity, nothing more. But some names bite back when you read them, and Maris Vale sank her teeth into me. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. In July of 1955, a man named Norton Hale came back to the little mill town where he'd been born. He worked auto factories up north now, visiting his mother on weekends. But that night, he stumbled into the wrong house party. The Vale house, where liquor blurred edges, and where Maris, her husband Calvin, her younger sister Lark, and a pair of hangers-on were drinking too heavily to stop the storm about to break. By sunrise, Hale was dead. The official story was an altercation. The papers said he cornered Lark in the yard, drunk and wild, bottle swinging in his hand. Maris, 26 years old, a toddler asleep inside, grabbed the revolver from beneath her sink. One shot to the chest. She swore she fired to save her sister's life. But the truth never fit neatly. Witnesses claimed she stood in the doorway, steady, the pistol level. Others swore she fired only as he lunged at her. Hale fell in the grass, gasping, bleeding, but not gone. Instead of taking him to a doctor, the group loaded him into his own car and abandoned him 4 miles out, staged to look like he'd simply crashed after a night of drinking. By the time officers recovered the revolver from a nearby creek, Maris was already marked as guilty. The judge gave her 30 years. Calvin got 10. Lark, young and fragile-looking, only a few. The others walked free. The town muttered its own judgment, that the Vale women had been trouble long before murder entered the picture, running a house of prostitution on the county line, tangling themselves in debts and favors no respectable neighbor wanted to acknowledge. But beneath the gossip, something else simmered. Hale had been no saint. Neither had the sheriff's men who turned blind eyes to Calvin's business. Something rotten lay under the verdict, and Maris Vale carried it alone. Prison carved years from her face, years from her son who grew tall behind glass. She learned the schedules, the shortcuts, the weakness in the walls. More importantly, she earned the trust of Alma, a night nurse who had grown up in the same town, who remembered Maris as a girl throwing stones across a creek. Alma didn't believe the murder was murder. One humid summer night in 1970, Alma staged a seizure, scribbled her name on a stretcher form, and wheeled Maris out the back door into a waiting car trunk. By dawn, the state's only record of her was a red-stamped word, escaped. The police swore they searched. Neighbors whispered she'd return for her boy. But days turned to weeks, weeks to years. She never came back. Decades later, I found her again. Not in a manhunt, not in police reports, but in records nobody bothered to cross-check. Florida, 1985. A woman named Estella Gant remarried in a courthouse ceremony. Social Security had her birth 2 days off from Maris's, but her parents' names matched. The trail was faint but undeniable. She had been alive, hiding in plain sight. And yet the database still listed her as missing, temporarily absent. It wasn't just oversight. It was neglect, or maybe convenience. Authorities never wanted to look too hard. Some ghosts are more useful unsolved. I went south to Brevard County. Her house still stood, a single-story ranch on a quiet street where retirees walked small dogs. Estella Gant had died in 2000, buried under a name the state never connected to Maris Vale. But inside her circle still breathed Alma, the nurse, older now, her hair the gray of ash, her hands steady as ever. She poured me tea with the same care she'd once used to slip a prisoner through a back gate. She wasn't hiding because she was guilty, Alma said softly. She was hiding because she had no choice. That's when she slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, a marriage license, a photograph of a toddler in a duck print dress, a letter signed only with the initial L, and a locket, heavy, still warm from Alma's palms. She left this behind for the day someone came asking, Alma said. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was evidence. What I held wasn't only proof of Maris's survival. It was a key, because alongside her hidden life there was a notebook, worn and fragile, that Alma swore had belonged to the sheriff's nephew. Inside were names, girls, dates, payments. It wasn't just corruption, it was a trafficking ledger. Maris hadn't been the only woman chewed up by that town. She had been the one who fought back, and they'd made her the villain. Her disappearance hadn't just been escape. It had been erasure, a convenience for men who built empires on silence. And if I brought the truth out now, it wouldn't just rewrite her record. It would burn down everything they'd built. The first warning came quiet. My apartment door pried open, nothing stolen. My files copied. The second came sharp, an email. You're wrong about your mother. My hands froze over the keys. My mother had died years earlier. The email was bait, or a threat, or both. I went back to Alma, but the knock came before I reached her porch. Two men in pressed shirts, polite as bankers, stood outside. They laid a driver's license on the table. A younger Estella Gant, suspended. You've mistaken your ghost, one said with a smile too thin to hold. They wanted the envelope. Instead, Alma upended a kettle of boiling water into the face of the second man, and his scream ripped through the house like the cry of something wild. Owen Burr, an old friend of Maris's, the man who had once driven the getaway trunk, burst through the back door and broke the first man's wrist with an elbow strike that spoke of long-buried muscle memory. The men fled, but they would be back. That night, the past walked in on her own. Lark. Older now, hair white as frost, eyes still sharp as broken glass. She stepped into Alma's kitchen, looked straight at me, and her breath caught. You carry her mouth, she whispered. And then she told me the truth no record ever had. Norton Hale hadn't died in that yard. The bullet dropped him, but he lingered. Cal and his men loaded him into the car, debating whether to save him. Somewhere down a pine-lined trade road, Hale gasped blood onto the dashboard and whispered a name, not God's, the sheriff's nephew's. He threatened to expose the whole rotten network. That's why he never reached a doctor. That's why his death had to be rewritten into a convenient murder pinned on Maris. Maris hadn't only taken the fall for her sister. She had taken it for a town. We thought the worst was behind us. We were wrong. The men returned, more of them, this time carrying their silence like a weapon. They wanted the notebook. But Lark was ready. She didn't flinch. She didn't reach for boiling water or fists. She reached for her voice, the same voice that had once told a sister to fire a gun to save her life. Sit, she commanded. And somehow, they did. Because behind her eyes burned the fury of 50 years stolen. The ledger sat on the table, its names whispering like ghosts. The men saw their empire crumbling in every line of ink. Alma's hands were steady. Owen's shoulders squared. My pulse thundered. This ends tonight, Lark said. And in that kitchen, surrounded by the weight of decades, we decided. We wouldn't bury the truth again. We would publish the ledger, burn the silence, and let the whole rotten structure collapse. Months later, the investigation tore through the county like wildfire. The sheriff's family name blackened. Foundations toppled. Men resigned, feigning illness. Others went to trial, dragged into the light by the whispers of ghosts finally given voices. But the final twist came not from the ledger, not from the courts, but from a clerk in a dusty county office. I had asked for a correction to a death certificate, changed the legal name from Estella Gant to Maris Vale. The clerk peered over her glasses, frowned, and turned the screen toward me. A handwritten annotation glowed faintly in the scan, identified by daughter. Name withheld at decedent's request. My throat closed. My mother, dead too young, her past always a silence, had been the one to stand in that office, claim the body, and carry the secret. Maris Vale hadn't just been a stranger I found on a list. She had been my grandmother. The ghost I had chased belonged to my blood. The database finally updated. Maris Vale, located, deceased. No longer temporarily absent. The ledger scorched the reputations of men who thought power could buy silence forever. Alma tended her tomatoes. Owen bought a truck too new for his age and smiled like a boy again. Lark lived with fire in her voice, the kind that can still cut men down. And I kept the locket. Inside, a lock of hair and a photograph of a woman whose mouth I carried, whose eyes I wore. The story was no longer about a missing inmate. It was about a woman who disappeared not to escape punishment, but to protect a daughter. About how silence can be weaponized, and how truth, even 50 years late, can break it apart. Some ghosts are never found, but Maris Vale wasn't a ghost anymore. She was mine.